Hey everyone, Leroy here, and this is a video guide on how to get into endgame raiding without underperforming or holding your group back. First, if you want to get into Savage or Ultimate raiding, know that you can do it. If you've struggled to finish clearing a raid tier or had a bad experience in Party Finder, it's not your fault. There's a lot of misinformation out there and a lack of community set guidelines and expectations to facilitate a smooth experience. If you've been afraid to get into endgame because of fear of holding your team back, getting criticized, or afraid you won't perform up to standards, you aren't the only one. We've all been there. The raids in this game are some of the most polished and enjoyable experiences in the game. When I first started raiding, I was pretty bad by most people's standards. In the beginning, I would spend hours in a party only to end up not being in the fight, been ridiculed for my performance, and even kicked for having low DPS. But once I understood and applied the principles I'll go over in this video, I was able to grow as a player, meet some of my closest friends, and clear every fight in the game. We don't want to be that player that comes into a fight unprepared and holds everyone back, the player that's dead weight that we've all run into. With that being said, let's get right into it. We'll be covering mentality, group and role expectations, gearing, and party etiquette. Raiding can be difficult, but it doesn't have to be. The most important principle to keep in mind is don't be afraid to fail. Mistakes are bound to happen. The most skilled players are the ones who made more mistakes than everyone else and learn from them to grow as a player, which leads me to the second point, learn from your mistakes. The best thing you can do to help your raid group is do your best. Before stepping foot into the raid, make sure you learn the opener for your job. Never make up your own. Your opener sets the bar for your DPS throughout the rest of the fight, so make sure you utilize resources such as the balanced Discord or simply Google FFXIV your job opener. Lastly, keep in mind when going for your first clear of any fight, handling mechanics properly always takes priority over personal DPS. Remember, you do 0 DPS when you're dead. Before we go into individual role expectations, let's briefly cover some group responsibilities and misconceptions. First, damage mitigation is the entire raid group's responsibility, so utilize your abilities and defensive cooldowns accordingly. We'll go into more detail shortly. Second, it is everyone's responsibility to DPS, including the tanks and healers. And finally, learn when to apply your raid buffs. If you learned a proper opener and didn't make your own up, they will line up. The amount of greedy emboldenings I see is getting out of hand. Alright, let's go into individual role expectations. Tanking is not for the faint of heart, as you have the bulk of the responsibility in the group. You're expected to reduce as much damage taken as possible, not only for yourself and your co-tank, but for the entire raid group, utilizing raid defensive cooldowns and reprisal. Tank swap at appropriate times using the ability Shirk. Interrupt boss abilities using Interject when necessary. And make sure the boss is positioned to help DPS maintain uptime. And really quick, let's talk about 2 mistakes I see happen a lot in Party Finder. First, always do a ready check before you pull. And second, give at least a 15 to 20 second countdown so your party members can prepare their openers. As a healer, your first priority is to keep everyone alive. And second, DPS when you are not healing. Never stand around doing nothing. Apply the ABC principle. Always be casting. Some of the DPS checks of the later fights can be very tight, especially before everyone outgears the raid tier. It is your obligation to contribute as much DPS as you can in order to smoothly clear an encounter. As a physical range DPS, you are expected to help mitigate incoming raid damage by utilizing abilities such as Troubadour, Tactician, and Shield Samba. Interrupt abilities using head graze when necessary, and reduce your chance of dying by using second wind when needed. For casters, you will be expected to help mitigate incoming magical damage by using the ability Addle, and for summoners and red mages, help your healers out by rezzing in emergencies. Lastly, for melee DPS, you're expected to help mitigate incoming physical damage by using the ability Feint, and reduce the amount of healing needed by using Bloodbath and Second Wind when applicable. Next, let's go into gearing. Your first priority should be reaching the minimum eye level to complete the raid tier. In the case of the first Eden raid, the minimum item level to complete the last 2 turns would be 450. There are several ways to obtain appropriate gear. Innistr's Extreme will drop 450 accessories, while Titania Extreme will drop 450 weapons. You also have normal mode gear, which always meets the minimum item level requirements, but you are locked to getting 1 piece per turn per week until it unlocks. Crafted gear that comes out the same day as Savage will also meet the requirements and is the easiest to obtain as long as you have sufficient gil. Tombstone gear will also be released the same day as Savage and will be 10 item levels above the requirement and can be further upgraded 10 item levels higher by using items from the raid and later the 24-man. However, the amount of tomes you can get is on a weekly lockout. And lastly, make sure you mode your gear with the appropriate materia. Resources such as the balanced Discord can answer any stat weight priority questions you may have, or a quick Google search will usually suffice. Now that gear is out the way, make sure you always use food. Not only does it increase your max HP, but it also increases your DPS overall. Also, if you can afford it, use potions. While these aren't mandatory, they can and will certainly help meet the DPS checks in the later fights, especially early on in the tier. Finally, let's discuss some party etiquette. Being an MMO, we rely on 7 other players to help take down any raid boss. In order to have an enjoyable experience, here are some things to keep in mind. Communication is key. If you are unsure about something, speak up. Don't be afraid to use voice comms. Callouts can shave minutes and even hours off a group's raid time. Also, watch a guide beforehand when possible. Unless you are going for blind prog, you should always come into a fight as prepared as possible. Good sources for raid guides are Mr. Happy, MTQ, and Xenos' Vex. Figure out the group strategy and assign spots ASAP. When going for a clear, save LB for healers in case of emergency. The DPS loss from having 2 or more DPS dead is more than you gain from using a melee LB3. To reiterate, it is more efficient to use healer LB3 over melee LB3 if 2 or more DPS die. Finally, don't play the blame game. Remember, no one is perfect and mistakes are bound to happen. Learn to laugh at mistakes and move on. It's important to note that this isn't everything. We can go way more in depth into optimization and efficiency, but I wanted this to be a brief overview. I also want to hear what your experience rating has been like. If you have any questions or want to talk to me more, you can find me every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern. If you think this video can help someone, make sure you like, subscribe, and share it. Thanks for watching, happy raiding, and see you next time.